Hi, everyone. We're moving some of our etiquette and other sessions for the Hired series online, as many things are moving online right now. So I have some time with you, and I want to walk through some of the topics that we would have talked about for our etiquette luncheon. We will really focus in on dining, and I'll give you some tips and even hopefully some funny stories that make you laugh that I would have told you in person. But I also wanted to add a few other elements since we have this different platform to talk about etiquette. So let me tell you who I am first. My name is Karen Ivey, and I'm the Director of Career Services at the May Center. And it's a pleasure to talk about this. I actually recently got certified in etiquette training at an institute in St. Louis. And so I'm eager to share what I've learned with all of you. The whole premise of etiquette is it's culture. It's just like anything else. If you've traveled to a different country, if you've even, let's put this scenario out there, if you visited a friend's house or a contact's house and their family just did things you noticed in a very different way, or the way they communicated was different, that's a culture in itself, a very small scale of it, but that's a culture. And business also has its own culture for the most part. Every business will be a little different, just like each family has its own set of rules and norms and how they do things and how they talk about things. But there are some generic things to know as you move into a professional work environment. Many of you have that experience, but maybe some of you are a little less familiar. So hopefully, no matter what your level of experience is with etiquette in the workplace, you'll learn a little bit of something today that you can use as you move forward in your professional development. Let's get started. All right. So some important points. The slide that you see here, I'll go ahead and tell you the topics, are preparation, introductions, conversation, workplace behaviors, and eating. How to do all of these things when you're thinking about yourself as a professional. So we'll walk through these major sections and get more in depth. And please send questions if you have any comments, any questions, anything unclear by the time we finish. I will say for the credit for the Hired series and for this particular session, there is a reflection. So you're going to probably want to take some notes so that you have the ability to write a really great reflection and get the credit for it. All right. So professional preparation. You know, I talk a lot in working with students and other professionals. When I think about interviewing, one of the things that, or even the job search, one of the things that goes unnoticed is I think people think, I'll just wing it. You know, I've done all this school, I've done all this training, I have all this experience maybe. And they think when I get to the interview, what can I do really in lead up to that moment? You know, I'll just wing it. They'll ask me questions, I'll do my best and see how it goes. Well, there's actually a lot you can do to make yourself ready and more comfortable for those situations. And just generally preparing for a professional work environment is no different. So one of the things you want to do when you're moving into a work experience, this could be going to a conference, being in an interview, it's beginning new employment, maybe you're starting a new internship, you're a student teacher, and you're about to enter into a new classroom with a new supervising teacher. You might have a really great opportunity with a mentor. So you can see all these potentials of how you might have to connect up, and those types of scenarios require you to take it seriously, maybe not be so casual, not that you are, but you would not approach this the same way as meeting up with a friend for a chat. And so being prepared is super important. You want to gather as much information as you can. Let's say you are invited to a networking event. And so there'll be people there, maybe with a current organization that you're affiliated with. And it has to do with an industry that you're preparing for. Know as much as you can about that organization who's hosting. Know as much as you can about what are current events happening in the field that this is all about. Other things you may want to note is, who are my hosts? Can I look them up on LinkedIn? What are their backgrounds? What is their research, if they have any research? Have they written anything recently? You might even check to see if you can see other guests who've responded. You also want to see what is the dress code. If this is something in which you meet in person, if it doesn't say clearly, you may want to ask. And so we'll talk about that more in just a bit. All of those things make you prepared so that when you walk into a room and maybe you're by yourself and you know no one else in that room, you can find your host, you can find someone in the room, you can have an intellectual conversation and say, it's wonderful to meet you. Let me introduce you, here's who I am. Tell me about yourself. How are you connected with this particular meeting or this organization? And you'll have some good information to speak up because you've done your research. Be prepared too for chance encounters. I know way too many people who say, I was in the bookstore, I was in the grocery store, I happened upon someone I was talking to while I was waiting in line, and they happened to be influential. They happened to know a decision maker. I made a good impression. They asked for my information so they could pass it along. So be prepared for conversations at any point. All right, so we've talked a lot about this. Goals to have would just be knowing how to have a conversation with someone who is someone you admire in a field of interest. How would you lead a meeting? How would you answer those interview questions? All of these things are things that you can work on with your career advisor and get some practice on. But it depends on preparation, it depends on your research. For example, in an interview, if someone was to ask you, why do you want to work at this organization? Well, if you wing that question, employers can sniff that out. They know it right away. They know, oh, this person really is probably not all that interested because they didn't go very deep in their research of us. Whereas if you can say, I know your mission statement includes this. I know recently you expanded in this way. I know one of your core values is this. I know for this position, you're looking for someone with this type of skill, and that's how it relates back to what I have to offer. Wow, that's going to be impressive. Most applicants don't take that much time, but you don't want to be most applicants. You want to stand out. We talked about dress. So funny little story. As you read through the slide, and I will pick up the high points here as well, but funny story, I have worked with a gentleman who shared an interesting story of being unsure about dress. He went to a conference and they had a reception and the dress code was island casual. And he always told the story in which he thought, when he read that probably means like a t-shirt and my swim shorts, right? Like island casual, that's what I'd wear on an island, right? Sounds very casual, vacation-like. However, he did call, thankfully. It would have been more funny, I guess, if he showed up that way. He did call the host and say, can I get some more clarification on island casual? What would be the typical dress for, in his case, someone dressing in male clothes? And they said, oh, like white linen pants, a Hawaiian button-down shirt, something like that, sandals. And so he was so thankful he took that extra step to make sure he dressed appropriately. So advanced planning is crucial, especially if you don't understand what your host is expecting, so that you don't feel awkward. If you cannot tell and you are not able to get in touch with your host, which is appropriate for you to ask these questions, but if you're not able to ask, I would certainly dress a little nicer than maybe you think it means, because let's say you have something like business casual written on an invitation, and I think that one is probably the most confusing. One of the best strategies I've seen is to wear something and put a suit jacket over it. And if you get there and people are just in, regular slacks, regular pants, regular skirts, regular shirt, kind of your typical office wear, maybe a button down or nice shirt, but not suit jackets, it's easy to just take that off, leave it in the car, leave it aside, and then you're good to go. So think about how you can be versatile if you can't get that information. Know that most interviews are going to be professional dress, which does mean the matching jacket and pants or skirt as far as suits. However, if you're going into a research facility, maybe even something that's a little bit more hands-on, I would ask, because some places do say, no, we don't need them to dress like that, dress more casually but nice looking. So those are the best tips on how to figure out what dressing appropriately means. Know also that the May Center has a career clothes closet for you where you can take one suit as a student of this university and walk away with it. And that way you'll have the professional wear that you may need. All right, we've talked about overdressing. I did want to have a list of some of the most common dress codes out there for different events. As we've talked about, casual, business professional. When you get to semi-formal, you can see here cocktail dress is a suit for men, formal suit or tuxedo, formal dress or gown. I have noticed at galas and things like that, sometimes they'll even put in very specific details on the dress code or on the invitation about dress. So be sure to pay attention to that so you don't feel awkward with what is coming. Professional introductions, very important to consider when you're meeting someone or you're introducing one person to another. There's a few rules that we don't really ever talk about. So let's talk about them now. If you make a poor first impression though, let's say you don't get it right, here's why I'm telling you this, and I want you to tell me what you think. Just say it out loud, okay, right? The answer to the question on the screen. So if you did make a poor first impression, how many subsequent positive interactions do you need to overcome that bad first impression? What do you think? Think about that while I tell you this. This is not to freak you out, but this is to tell you that it does matter how you approach a situation because people do remember. There's something that I learned when I took a psychology class in college that I've never forgotten, and it's the primacy and the recency effect. And it means that people tend to remember the very first things about their interaction with you and the very last things about the interaction they have with you. So if you start well and you end well, those are the things that are likely going to stand out anyway. And so prepare for that great introduction now, right? Okay, so I'm curious what you thought, but I'll go ahead and give you the answer. So if you do have a poor interaction to begin a conversation, it typically, researchers say, takes 12 more positive interactions to overcome that bad first impression. That's a lot. There's a lot of business and professional events and interactions where you just don't get that kind of opportunity. So again, this is not to make you anxious. This is just to say this is important, what we're talking about today. When we also talk about first impressions, we have to think about body language. It's not all just what you're saying, but it's also what they see of you. And I want you to think through what of your first impression is just visual, not auditory, not what they hear you say, but just visual. So hopefully you're thinking of some things already. And then I want us to talk a little bit about which ones hold the most weight. So posture, not fidgeting, breaking nervous habits. So hopefully you're not gum chewing. Hopefully you're not doing things that are distracting, like, moving around your watch or bracelet or necklace or whatever it might be. Nail biting, certainly not. Honoring the others in your group, their personal space, so not getting too close. And a good strong handshake. Of course, when we are shaking hands with each other, you want it to be strong and firm and confident. But you don't have to break their hand to do it either. So you got to find that middle ground with that. And a smile. Nobody wants to talk to someone who's not positive. It doesn't mean you have to be giddy, right? You have to be authentic, and probably you're not giddy, but you do want to be positive and have a look of happiness or somewhat positivity, like you're happy to be there, versus I'm freaked out, that kind of look, or I do not want to be here. I want to be anywhere else but here. So those are things just to practice. There's another piece of your first impression that is only in your nonverbals that probably has more weight than anything else. And I wonder if any of you have guessed it. It's not quite listed yet, but I'll go ahead and tell you if you don't know, it is eye contact. With the US culture, eye contact builds rapport with someone else faster than anything else. If you can't look someone in the eyes, in our culture, in the American culture, it's very typical to think they're hiding something, they can't be trusted, I don't feel a connection. So consider that and make sure you practice eye contact for interviews, for social interactions, for professional events. It doesn't mean you stare them down, but you do want to make eye contact. It's normal to break eye contact when you're speaking, but to always reconnect throughout the conversation. All right, enough about that, right? All right, the handshake. If you needed to know the technicalities of a handshake, here you go. So extending your hand web to web. Now I have seen people really mess that up. So don't do anything where you're just barely grabbing someone's fingers or the top of their hand, or you're twisting their hand, or you're kissing their hand. All of that is not professional in nature. You want to go web to web, your palm to palm, shake from your elbow, typically 3 to 4 seconds, confidence, good eye contact, and you're good. And if I were with you right now, I'd make you practice, but you can practice on your own later. Name tags. Proper placement is high on the right shoulder. The reason being is that when you do shake hands, generally you're shaking with your right hand, and that right shoulder even kind of moves forward as you move into that position. And the line of sight from your eyes goes directly to that shoulder naturally. So have your name there, so hopefully they remember it, they see it, they're not going to forget who you are. All right, and you'll see that on the screen. Sometimes you'll have name tags, sometimes you won't. And so it'll be really dependent on you to introduce yourself well. All right, if you're making an introduction, there's some etiquette that goes along with that. The most honored person is mentioned first in the introduction. So you see the example there. Dean White, Dr. So-and-so, Mr., Mrs., whoever it may be. I would like to introduce my brother, Bob. So the more casual relationship is certainly the familial one in this situation. The more honored person is typically the one with a more senior degree, maybe even more senior in age. It's not something you even talk through, but you're just going to try to do your best to pick the person who might be the most honored in the room or the most respected in that particular field. If it's kind of equal status, like we mentioned, try to figure out maybe who's more senior in age, and typically you would address them first. If you get this wrong, it's not like a catastrophe. It's just a nice principle to keep in mind. That's a polite gesture. Now, as we get into conversations, some things to think about. A lot of conversations are built on small talk. We laugh about small talk and, being in a struggle to come up with maybe something to say sometimes. And it's just like anything else. You just have to practice. So you approach with a smile and good eye contact. That nonverbal stuff, that matters a whole lot. And remember the primacy effect. They're going to remember their first inclination of who you are. So that's going to matter a lot. And then open a conversation genuinely. Maybe you're at an event where you can compliment the food, or you can compliment the speaker you just heard, or the person you're introducing yourself to and you can compliment their work, or include an open-ended question. Maybe you want to say, what is your role with the committee that put this together? Thank you again so much. This has been a delightful event. Whatever would be normal and natural for you in that situation. You don't want to begin talking all about yourself. I think some people practice really, really hard, like a long speech, a long diatribe about here's all the great qualities about me. Have that ready. That's incredible. You do want to know that. You do want to be confident in that. But allow them to ask you a few questions. Let it be a back and forth conversation. So if you introduce yourself to them, I would start with name and maybe the reason why you're there. I'm a current student, or I'm an alumnus. I just graduated with this. And then allow for some back and forth flow of the conversation. Ask them about them. So people like talking about themselves. You just don't want to overdo it. If you also are one of the ones who likes to talk about themselves, spotlight what is going on. What is a genuine interest about the reason you're at whatever event or whatever gathering you're at. Many gray areas, I think, for a lot of people is figuring out, okay, do the old rules, old traditional rules apply? So for instance, if you're a man who is walking with a couple of female coworkers and there's a door ahead, do you reach out? Do you hold the door? Some of this just varies by where you live. In the southern region, that is very typical. For that to be just a nice gesture, a nice thing to do. Whereas in some other areas of the country, it's either not needed, or if, let's say, a woman in the group reaches the door first, she may have an issue if you try to get in the way and grab that door. So just know where you are and kind of take cues by body language of others. When you're meeting someone, let's say you're at a table and having a dinner, if someone comes to join your table, both typically men and women rise now. It used to be just men, and shake hands and make introductions. And whoever extends the invitation to the meal, let's say you want to get coffee with someone who you feel could be a mentor. If you've extended that invitation, typically you would pay. Now, if you're the one who got invited, make sure you have a way to pay for something just in case your host decides not to pay. So you're prepared and it won't be embarrassing. A good conversationalist does a few things. They're first and foremost polite, which part of being polite is being a good listener. Don't think of what you're about to say while they're talking to you. Just listen. And again, it's funny to say this here, but just like anything else, some of this just takes practice. Practice with your friends, practice with your family. Have a conversation. Are you putting them at ease? Are you asking good questions? Can you discuss a lot of different things when you pick a topic? And don't interrupt. A lot of people take offense if you interrupt the conversation. You would also accept a compliment. Sometimes it's hard for people. Or if they say, you know, tell me about one of your accomplishments, be ready to boast about some of the things you've done. I wouldn't make a long list again of all your best points and how you're the best thing ever and maybe how they should hire you or want you on your team, on their team. But you want to be prepared to be confident in what you do have to offer to someone in a professional capacity. When you're mingling, approach groups of 3 rather than 2. Sometimes if it's a 2-person conversation, it may be a private nature. So approach a bigger group, kind of listen in. Typically people open up the group just naturally, and then try to build in a comment or something you know for the conversation. Pick up nonverbal cues. If someone's talking and says, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, or please excuse me, of course, allow them to leave. Don't try to keep that conversation rolling. And then you can always use your drink, that you need to refresh a drink or something of that nature if you need to get out of a conversation. So maybe it's going on a little long and there's other people in the room that you want to speak with. That's a good way to get out of that. And hold your drink in the left hand. Why would you do that? You probably already know. That way your right hand is available for you to reach out, extend it, and shake hands with other people. All right. I hope you're getting some tips, maybe some things you hadn't thought about before. Telephone tips. All right. So all of us who work in an office setting have a phone, and it's not typically a cell phone. Now, some of you may do work that's remote. You may do work from home. You may have all these different scenarios. You may do a type of job in which you're on call, and so you're not going to have more of an office job. But if you're in charge of answering a phone in any capacity, there's some different etiquette that we need to discuss that is not talked about at all anymore. You know, it's interesting to me that many people in the workforce of today have never had to answer a phone that wasn't just specifically for them. And many times a phone where they didn't know the person who was calling them. You know, if you're like me, if it's on my cell phone and I don't know the number, I'm typically going to let that go straight to voicemail, and I'll figure out if it's a scammer or if it's somebody asking for, you know, political information later, right? I screen my calls, but you don't always get to do that in an office. So when you begin a call, let's say you're calling out, you would introduce yourself, who you represent, and who you want to speak to. So calling out, keep those things in mind. Make sure you're upfront about who you are and what you would like to do. When you're answering a call, write down the caller's name. That phone call information may come in handy later. So write down their name, repeat it twice or so in the conversation, just so that you get that down. And then take notes. Maybe you're taking notes for someone else. Maybe that phone call really should go to a colleague. So you want to have a very good message you can pass along to your supervisor, to a colleague, to whoever it belongs to. And when they say, well, who was it that called and what was it they were asking about and what's their number in which I can reach them? You've done a good job in preparing them. So really key, really crucial to being a good professional. Tone and voice clarity are important, even more important than the words you use. Let's say you're on a phone interview, right? Those are becoming very popular. when someone's nervous, it's really typical for them to talk faster. So you may have to work specifically on slowing down. Smile, speak clearly, slowly, just like we talked about. It's polite to return any phone calls within 24 hours. That should always be a goal. And you never want to do anything distracting like eating or chewing gum while you're on the phone with someone. So keep all of those things at a minimum so that the conversation is the focal point. Workplace behaviors. Let's talk about those. If someone enters an office, whoever they may be, it doesn't matter their job or their title, it's rude. It's perceived rude if you do not greet them. So, good morning. How are you doing? Nice to see you. Whatever it may be that feels comfortable for you, but some sort of pleasant greeting, a smile, or a handshake. When you call on someone, so let's say you call a meeting together or you stop by a colleague's office, you're a guest in their office, just like you probably wouldn't go over to some friend's house. No, that's probably not the best example. If you went over to someone, maybe a neighbor's house that you don't know that well. So let's say it's a neighbor that you just see out when you're walking your dog or something like that. So you don't know them that well. If you went over, knocked on their door, and they opened the door and said hi, like they normally would, they may or may not invite you in, right? I mean, they may say, what can I help you with, right? You're not going to push your way past them and go put your feet up on their couch and lay down and make yourself comfortable, right? You wouldn't do that if you didn't have that relationship already. Well, in an office scenario, you certainly don't want to do that. It's already a different environment. It's a more professional environment. So don't make yourself too comfortable in their space. When you come by, is this a good time for me to speak with you? If not, if they say not right now, you can say, can I look at your calendar and see if I can find an available time? Great, that's a very professional way to do that. And then when you're in there, you, again, don't want to get sloppy. You don't want to bring a bunch of food and snacks into someone else's space. You don't want to put your feet up on the desk. You don't want to do those type of things. Of course, you wouldn't do that. But anyway, just telling you, just in case. Be prepared with what you're hoping to accomplish, especially if you're the person who's leading a meeting. Make sure you have clear objectives and ask if it's a good time before you just walk in and sit down and have all your questions ahead. Make sure you're on time. Surprise visits. Now, it's okay in your office if this is your culture, office or lab or wherever you might be working, or you know, some of you may go on to law school or whatever scenario you may find yourself in. It's okay to go in, for instance, to visit with a law professor in some sort of walk-in capacity. They may have already set that up for you. So of course we know that's okay. But you might not go by the CEO's office and just come on in and have a seat, right? Because there are people that run a calendar that's very tight. And so it would be important to know what's an appropriate thing to do as far as getting the communication across that you need to with the person who's there. If your office culture is very casual and you can just drop in, great, but you have to read the room. So you might even talk with a supervisor about that and what are the expectations. All right, I think we've talked about a whole lot of these things already. When your scheduled time is up, again, being careful and conscious of time is a really nice thing. Most people prize time and the value of their time over money. Maybe that's not shocking to you, but you need to keep that in mind. True or false? Let's do a quiz question. More people involuntarily lose their jobs because of poor attendance or bad punctuality, meaning they're late, than any other reason. So loss of jobs, you think that's true, that's the number one reason is poor attendance and being late to lose a job? I'm curious what you're saying right now, but I will tell you it's important that you know this answer. It is true. And these are things you can control. Bad traffic, an accident on your way to work, you can't control that other than always leaving your house with some wiggle room, with some time in your commute to make sure if you do come upon something like this, that you give yourself some time not to run super late. But for the most part, you need to, for the majority of the time, be on time, be even there before things open, right? So if you have a job that starts at 8 o'clock, I would say be in your office, be ready 10 minutes before is a great thing to do. that builds your professional brand within your organization. They know you're trustworthy, you're prompt, you're taking it seriously, and you're ready to go, which makes them think, well, this is a person who's reliable and dependable, and I can trust them with other things. Poor attendance, like not calling in, just not showing up, that's terrible as far as trust. And you want an employer and a supervisor and colleagues who can trust you. Those are the type of people they're going to want to promote. A lot of absenteeism happens on Mondays and Fridays. Do you think that's true? I do. And it is true. So just something to consider. If you're calling in every Monday because you've had a wild weekend, people are going to start to make some assumptions about you, whether it be true or false. So just be careful and conscious about that. Most common pitfalls. This is a survey that was done a few years ago, but the data seems to be about the same today. So the lack of respect is the #1 pitfall, and that might look like not showing up on time. People's interpretation of what's respectful, that's a conversation you may want to have with a supervisor. Hopefully you have a supervisor in which you could say, what's going well? Do you see me making any mistakes that I can correct now? I'm going to course correct really early. But being aware of the things we talk about today, that will hopefully help you not be in a position where you are disrespecting a colleague or a culture of a company. Communication skills, ambition, you can see the whole list here. These are all important things and things that you want to consider moving forward as you build your own professional, as we talked about, brand. How to stand out. Let's talk about the positive, right? The positive is always more fun. So being prepared is actually one of the strongest ways to build a quality professional brand. So communication skills being the very close second. And you can see so many of the other things that we've talked about today. So be prepared, know what you're doing, know the culture, know the people as best as you can, and communicate well. And these are things the career services area of the May Center want to practice with you or talk with you through, prepare for you, or give you feedback. So take advantage of our services. Even as an alumnus, you have that advantage. So a networking lunch. A lot of people find that's a great time to meet up with a mentor, a colleague, a business associate. Maybe you're on a committee with someone and you want to talk with them a little further. Lunches are probably the easiest time to make that work. So that might be an ideal option if you're looking for that. Typically, you grab food. After the food is served, you go straight into the business or the objectives of the meeting. It's least compromising, meaning hopefully the person that you are meeting up with, and you've been clear with your objectives of why you want to meet, they won't feel like this is like more than a business professional environment, that this is not you making some sort of romantic gesture. You don't want that, right? You could allow 2 hours as a power lunch, but you want to be clear with your time frame and ask them what would be appropriate, what they have time to meet for, and stick to it. So again, timeliness is going to be important for anything we talk about today, and you see that again. All right, we're moving right into dining etiquette, and I so wish we were having a lunch or a dinner together right now, but I do want to go over some of the things that are most important when you get into a dining situation. And we need to know, why is that important? Well, the importance of dining etiquette is that you want, again, to make a good impression. Emily Post, who is famous for dining etiquette, had this great quote: "All the rules of table manners are made to avoid ugliness." Again, making a good impression, avoiding ugliness. I love that. That makes me laugh. There are some variations to the rules here. And so I'm going to tell you up front what is negotiable, what some people will say is right versus others will say is right. You're going to hear in the next few slides as we talk together what is most commonly heard as far as methods or processes with etiquette dining, okay? And the basics to a formal business dinner. This is not what you want to look like when you get to a dining etiquette situation, right? No way. Rule number 1. This one, if nothing else, walk away remembering this. You are not at a dining event, whatever kind of event that may be. Maybe you have an interview that happens across a meal. That does happen with some organizations. Or maybe there's an important business decision that's going down and you're having dinner with some associates, right? Those are scenarios that could play out. but you're never at an event with food to enjoy the food. I mean, your host wants you to have a great meal and enjoy what you're eating, don't get me wrong. But it's way more important that you build those connections with the people that you're dining with. That's 12 times more important than actually enjoying the food. It's not about the food. Okay, so we've got that down. You'll hear me say that maybe 1 or 2 more times. You're there to network. You're there to build a positive brand. If you love that food, great. It's a bonus. If you don't, again, it's not about the food. It's not to complain. It's not for you to take it up with the wait staff. It is for you to think, well, later I will take care of my hunger in a different way. I'll go through a drive-thru on my way home. And just do your best with what's on your plate. With formal dining, when you first arrive at a formal dining event, you need to know a few things. So as you're preparing to sit down at a table, you may have an assigned seat, but you may not. If you don't have assigned seats, maybe you have an assigned table, right? You need to consider who else is at your table. So I'll tell you, I've been at dining events where the president of our university was also at the table that I was at. And there were other people who were coming in, and the president had provided the funding for all the people around the table to be at that dinner. Obviously, more respected person at the table is Dr. Madsen. The person who was our host who provided the funding to do this, Dr. Madsen, it's easy to see that she would be the maybe most respected person at that table because of the scenario we were in. And there were people who took the best seats. Now, how do you know what the best seats are? I'll tell you, it is the seats that provide the best view without having to turn your head too much to the stage or the screens or whatever you might be viewing at the meal. If there isn't a presenter, if there isn't a presentation or speaker going on, then it's probably harder to tell what the best seat is. And there may not be a best seat. And I would likely, in either scenario, stay standing and talk with others until that person arrives and let them choose their own seat. That is one of the most important things. A napkin demonstration. So as you sit down around tables, you've found, your guest of honor at your table or the person who is your table host. They've picked their spot. You're all in place. You need to take that napkin from the table and you're going to want to put it in your lap somehow, right? Patty Mills, some of you know this famous spur. He was famous for waving a towel around. This is not how you want to take your napkin from the table to your lap. No, it should be something much less dramatic, okay? So you would fold it in your lap, and you fold it actually the way you'll see pictured. So it's folded with the edges towards you. That way, if food drops, it may hopefully drop into that little pouch you've created. And if you dab your lips or have crumbs around your mouth that you're wiping away, it will also hopefully fall into that pocket. So etiquette is somewhat purposeful, right? If you know the reasons why, it starts to make sense. When you first arrive, we've already talked about who sits where, how you figure that out. But you also need to know that the custom is to enter your seat from the left and exit to the right. Food is also at a formal dining event. It's given to you from your left shoulder and taken away from your right shoulder. And so what that does is prevent a lot of bumping, clattering of plates. When you're sitting down, you're not bumping into guests on either side. So left in and right out. Pretty easy to remember, hopefully. Also, you want to introduce yourself. We've talked about introductions. So introduce yourself around the table. Get that conversation started. You want to think about topics that would be important to bring up. What might you also avoid? So I would tell you I would avoid politics. I bet you're shouting some other answers right now, maybe in your room. Religion, probably some of those things that are a little more tense for people. Focus on the reason why you're there. If it is a religious or political reason, sure, then absolutely that makes sense. But otherwise, focus on the things that relate to the reason that you've gathered together. We've talked about your napkin, you've gotten it in place, and then start looking at the shared items on your table. So many times dinner rolls are in a basket, there's salad dressing in a bowl or dish. They are also always passed to the right. So whoever's nearest to that salad dressing or whatever it may be can start that rotation. But if you're closest, okay, I have bad news for you, but it'll be okay, I promise. You're going to reach for that salad dressing, let's just say. You don't serve yourself first. Another etiquette lesson. So if you're closest, you pick it up, you offer it to the person on your right, it goes all the way around the table and back to you, and then that's when you get to serve yourself. And it's just, again, one of those customary things. It shows your generosity, and it can make you look really like you know what you're doing. So keep that one in mind. If you're given an option of what to order, how do you decide, right? Okay, here's a sample of a menu. What are you going to pick? I know some of you may be saying, well, I have to pick something that is not too messy. You're right. You don't want to pick spaghetti. You don't want to pick lobster. That's way too messy at a formal dining event. Maybe you pick something that you know will be easy to cut, something that you also like, right? One or two things that you can do is ask the wait staff some suggestions, but then one thing that you risk is they may tell you the highest priced item on the menu, and you don't want to do that to your host. So a better option is to ask the person who has invited you to the meal, what do you like here? Would you recommend anything specifically off the menu? And they can tell you from there. If you're at a meal where you don't get a chance to order, it's already pre-selected, but maybe you have food allergies, make sure you tell your host in advance. For something medical, you want to do that. If it's just you get served something you don't particularly like, I've got a story for you, and we'll talk about how you handle that, because I guarantee you that's one of the most important questions I get, or most critical questions I get from students is, what if I get served something really gross? So I'll go ahead and tell you before we get into place settings. When I did the etiquette course, we had to go through a very extensive training, and at the end of one of the days, at the very end of the training, we had to go to a very fancy Italian restaurant. And one of the things that the restaurants, especially a very high-end restaurant, does is serve something called an amuse-bouche. And translated, it means something like a mouth teaser. And so it should be like a bite of something that the kitchen, the waitstaff, that restaurant feels is like their best dish, and it's just a taste of it. It's like their one chance to show off to you their best dish. Well, I'm at this Italian restaurant, which is amazing, by the way, but for their amuse-bouche, which comes first, they brought out a slug. It was garnished with garlic, and I like garlic, so that was a good thing. But I looked at it for a second, and I watched the instructor who was watching all of us, and there was no way to not eat it, unless, you know, I didn't want to get my certification, I guess, but I really did. And I'm telling you, slugs are not really my thing. So that slug, or it was called a snail, but I'm telling you, looking at it on my plate, it looked more like a slug to me than a snail. So it was pretty big, and it was definitely more than a bite. I got a generous portion, which I wasn't all too happy about, but I went ahead, put the thing in my mouth, and I had to chew it and swallow it and just be done with it. And it was more mental than anything else, but I did not want to risk hurting the feelings of my host. And I knew I wasn't allergic to slugs or snails or whatever. And so it was not a medical thing. So I knew I needed to just move through it and get past it. That is exactly what you'll be doing, I hope, because certainly don't push yourself and have some sort of reaction. But it is the polite thing to do, is to eat what is given to you, and you'll get through it, and then you'll have a great story to tell your friends and family. All right. When you look at a place setting, this is what you may see. Now, this is a formal dinner place setting for a several course meal. You'll see a soup bowl on top of a dinner plate. You'll see all those knives and spoons on your right. You'll see your forks on the left and your napkin, a coffee, bread plate, glasses, a dessert spoon, and a dessert fork. Okay, for a typical formal dining event, you won't see this many things. You probably aren't going to have that many courses of your meal, but this is what it could look like. And so this is just to familiarize yourself, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to make sense of it. All right, let's look at one aspect of this together. So, I hope you can read that. The bread plate is always going to be on your left. When sometimes you would approach a table, everything is so condensed or pushed together, it's hard to see whose belongs to who. And so if you have that bread plate up at your top left, you know that's yours, that's not your neighbor to the left. So bread plate on the left. And then drinks on the right. A lot of people do get confused on that. And I've had a colleague who had people drinking both drinks on either side of them. They had no drink. What do you think they did? Everyone often says they told the wait staff. Yeah, that's an option if you can do it discreetly. But if you can't, he just ate his meal without a drink. Again, because of the whole premise of why we're talking about dining etiquette, which is it's not about the food. And we know that. You know that statement already. And your meal is right there in the middle. So what that does is it creates an acronym that we can remember, and it can help you remember. The dessert utensils and all of that is at the top. Let me show you that acronym I was talking about. Bread, B for bread, M for meal, and W for water. So bread, meal, water. That way you can remember with BMW, maybe that's a car that you like. BMW is going to help you remember your place setting and what's yours when you get to your table. Hope that helps. Another way to do it is to put your hands with your index finger and your thumb together. Hold them both out in front of you with your thumb and index finger up or on the top. And that makes the lowercase letters B on the left and D on the right. So bread on the left, drink on the right. B for bread, D for drink. So those are two ways to help you remember. If you get confused, again, here's the acronym. I think we got it down though. It has caused confusion in the past. You never begin eating any course until everyone at your table has been served, and you don't start eating until, who do you think starts? So everyone's gotten their food. You don't begin eating until your table host does. So if they're having a great conversation and they have not noticed how awesome the food in front of them is, and they're not moving quickly to it, you don't pressure them. You just wait politely until they finish and they start eating. You also don't butter an entire dinner roll or slice the bread in half like we typically would do at home. So etiquette would say you tear off a piece of your roll over the little plate and butter one bite at a time. And the reason for that is that it creates less crumbs. So the crumbs hopefully are happening over your little plate and not, again, the etiquette rules are for less crumbs. If you made a butter sandwich with that roll and ate it over your lap, there's probably going to be a little bit more crumbs on you and on the napkin that you have in your lap. So salad. All right, when you begin to eat your salad, which that usually is a course, some things to consider. Do not try to spear a cherry tomato. I've seen incredible things happen to those where they launch across the table, they squirt into the neighbor's eye. Don't do any of those things. Additionally, you want to consider soup. We didn't talk about that because typically you may see soup before your salad. Spoon the soup away from you. We're not used to that, most of us, and that also prevents drippage. So those are some of your first courses. Conversation reminders. You want to engage. It's not about the food, so make sure you're having and influencing good conversation around you. We've talked about avoiding controversial issues. So here's again some rules on soup and salad as we review your first course. So soup is typically before your salad. Use your soup spoon, and hopefully you remember you dip away towards the back of the bowl. If you have cheese on the top of your soup, you would cut it against the side of your bowl. And when you're finished, the soup spoon stays in a shallow bowl, or if you have a really deep bowl, it can return to an under plate if you have that under your soup bowl, and the wait staff will pull that away. With the salad, of course, remember how you pass the salad dressing. Which way are you going to pass it? Hopefully you're pointing or saying right, because that would be correct. And you would never serve yourself first if it's closest to you. You already know that, right? Okay. Also with a salad, again, don't spear something that has a chance to launch or spew. You got it. I know you have it. All right, how you cut your food. In the picture you see above with the tines of the fork down with the left hand, this is an appropriate way to cut your food. And there's two different styles. So The other way you'll see pictured below. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that is another picture of what we would call a certain style of cutting food. It has a couple of names, so let's talk about it. When you have those cutting options, you have continental or European style, which is what you just saw with the tines down and the fork stays in the left hand. The knife helps you cut, you use it with the right hand, and they never change. So that is called European and continental style. When you bring the food from the plate to your mouth, you use your fork like normal, but you use the left hand, and that food on your fork, that bite-sized piece, comes up to your mouth with tines down. I hope that makes sense. The American style is the exchanging the knife and the fork back and forth. Just never put anything that you've used with food on the table. The reason for that is that it kind of goes back to older days. It even makes sense for today. Many times there's a tablecloth on the table that could easily be stained. And so anytime you use a utensil, it always stays on the plate after that point. And your napkin never returns to the table until the end. You would put it where on the side maybe of your dish, because enfolded so the crumbs don't get out. Anything like that that's touched food or has the potential of getting dirty, you don't want to soil, you don't want to ruin or stain that linen that's on the table. So that is the reason for that. All right, and there we go. So a reminder right there, place any utensils that have been used on your plate while resting. You would indicate to the food staff with your fork and knife a certain position to tell them you're through, and we'll show you that in just a moment. Taste your food before you season it. It's an insult to the chef if you do it before, because it would indicate that you think they probably don't know how to properly season it. So taste it, and then it's okay to add salt or pepper, whatever you need. And if you leave the table for any reason, your napkin will go in your chair. Why is that? We just talked about it, right? The napkin is considered dirty after you start using it with your meal. And so you don't put dirty things on a table. So leave that on your chair. Some tips on beverages. So many times you may have some water around your mouth or tea or whatever you're being served. Blot your lips as needed. Only take a drink when you don't have food in your mouth. That goes, probably most of us know that, but just preventing a bad situation, bad scene. 1 or 2 sips at a time. Don't gulp that water, and no bubbles, no slurping, none of that stuff. None of that fun stuff. That's for when you're with your nieces or nephews or little kids when you're having a good time. If you need a pusher, so let's say you have a piece or a bite on your plate that needs a little help getting onto the fork, you can use, Emily Post would even approve of this, you can use your knife or bread. It is okay. So use as needed. What problems do you see in this picture? For those of you who are able to see this, I wonder if you notice a couple of things actually. So I'm going to circle one that I see, elbows on the table, not just the woman who's being called out right here, but you can see it all the way across the table. So elbows never go on the table. That's just a little too casual for formal dining. The other thing you may have seen on that plate was a cell phone. Cell phone being out, your phone should be away, any distractions should be put away, because it's all about your opportunity to network and build connections with other people. I want to make a quick note here. When we're talking about dining, we are talking about this from an American perspective. So from a US culture perspective, dining around the world does have some variations. Make sure you talk to the Career Center before you have that experience, or going abroad or having some sort of internship internationally. There are certain things you need to know. So CNN Travel has a great article talking about some tips that you may want to consider. There's some tips here, and I'll probably, in interest of time, let you do some research on your own. I wonder if you see any of the statements here that you know the answer to. I bet many of us know you would never eat tacos with a fork. So that is the correct answer. If you want to screenshot this and go find the answers, I encourage you to do that. And we have a few more fun facts, so I'll let you do the same thing here, and I'll pull out one as an example for you. So I'll pick the one for China. So in China, you might be served fish. You would never flip the fish to eat the meat from the other side. You would eat it through the bones. You would just never flip it. There is a custom there that if you flip the fish, it would be bad luck for the fisherman who provided that fish. It's almost like the boat capsizing. So it's just part of the culture, part of their traditions. And so you would never flip the fish. All right, hopefully you screenshotted that if you wanted to go find some more answers. A few more formal dining tips. The salt and pepper, they're always passed to which way? The right. I'm sure that's what you said. They are together. They don't leave each other's side. They are very happily married, as we could say. So you would pass them always together. If someone said, could you please pass the pepper? You just go ahead and let the salt accompany that pepper around the table. You don't take your jacket off at the table. Typically, that's a little too casual. Follow the lead of your host, though, when you ever have questions. If they take off their jacket, then it's a free thing for you to do. No chewing gum, that's obvious. No using a comb or a brush to do cosmetics. I see this a lot, but that again is, excuse yourself, go to the restroom if you need to do something like that. That is not table etiquette. All right. A few more tips. Never answer that cell phone. If you have an emergency situation, you would indicate to your host well in advance, I need my phone out for this particular reason. I have a family emergency and I need to be available. Otherwise, I won't be answering any calls or messages. Never complain about the food or service, again, because it's not about the food. You can do that in your own personal life, but for this purpose, you are there to make those connections and build your professional brand. When you're finished, you'll place your knife and fork across the right side. That's one way of doing it. The knife facing in, so you can see the cutting part facing in, and tines up. So that's a way to do that. You can fold your napkin, make sure any part of the napkin that has been stained or touched your mouth is on the inside, so that again, you don't stain the linens on the table, and you can put that on the left side of the plate. Here's the alternate plan. Some people just vary it a slight bit by angling their fork and knife. So that again that's an indication to your waitstaff that you're ready for them to pick up that plate. And remember again, which way will they be picking up the plate? Because just like you enter the chair on the left and leave from the right, if you have to leave the table, they'll be bringing your food from the left. Yes, you got it. And they'll pick up that food and that plate from your right shoulder. So just so you know, it's nothing you have to remember, but that is something you should know at fine dining experiences. So what do you do? Let's talk over some scenarios before we wrap this up. What do you do if you hate the food? You guys, I have been there. I told you about my slug experience. I also had a situation where my boss was paying at a different job than I'm at right now, and it was fish tacos, and it was the most fishy fish tacos I have ever had, but it was such a kind gesture. So yes, you can get away with some of that, like pushing your food around on the plate, making it look like you ate more than you did. Maybe you have practice from being a little kid and having to do that. But as best you can, you want to eat the food that you've ordered or that has been provided for you. And I ate the fishy fish tacos, and I pushed a little bit around the plate, if I'm honest too. If you aren't old enough to drink and alcohol is offered, or if you don't drink and alcohol is offered, what do you do with that? So that's a scenario you may find yourself in. Do not ever drink if you're underage, and you don't have to make a big deal about it. Also, if you're not a person who enjoys alcohol or wants to partake in that, you just say, none for me today, thanks. That's all you have to do when the waitstaff comes around and offers. If someone next to you does take your drink, we talked about this, right? If they take your water, you can very discreetly signal to the waitstaff. Really good restaurants and dining experiences, they're very conscientious with guests. They're paying attention to your needs. I once dropped my fork, which that's a little bit embarrassing, but it just somehow rolled out of my hand onto the floor. Again, not something you want to do, but that waitstaff was over and gave me a new fork before I think anyone at my table even saw. So hopefully you're with a dining staff that is that gracious and that helpful to make that the least amount of embarrassing. But if someone takes your drink and there's nothing you can do without making a big scene or anything like that, then you just deal with it and you drink at the end. You find a way to get a drink after. If you have an emergency situation, right, we've talked about this, you would tell your host in advance. What if you're really hungry and that person next to you doesn't even start to eat that great dessert? Dessert is at the end, right? You have your dessert utensils we saw in the place setting at the top of your place setting at the top. And usually, even sometimes the dessert is already in front of you. Maybe you're just salivating over their cheesecake. Nope, it's not appropriate for you to ask for their food. If they offer it, that's a different story, but you would not ask for a plate or food off of someone else's plate. If you have tomatoes in your salad bigger than one bite, if you have a hard time spearing it, you skip it. We've talked about that. What if you have a piece of gristle in your food, or it's like a tough part, a chewy part, or a bad part, and you only notice after you've taken that bite? You don't spit it out. The appropriate thing is to swallow it down. Do the best you can. I've told you about my dropping the fork experience. So yes, you would get the wait staff to help you with finding another utensil. If your lip gloss, for those of you who wear lip gloss, wore off during your meal, excuse yourself and go to the bathroom if you just have to reapply. All right, so we're done. Hopefully you learned some things. Again, if we didn't get to do this in person, we will have more etiquette dinners on campus available to you where you get a free meal, and we have so much fun, and I'll reiterate a lot of what you learned today. And you may even have some chances to interact with someone at your table, a table host, an employer, that it could really make a big difference in your life. You might meet someone who is very influential, and you'll know all the right things to do. We also laugh a whole lot at these events, so I hope you'll join us when we have our next etiquette dinner or etiquette luncheon on our campus. I want you to reflect and to get credit again for this hired class. You may be doing this for your supervisor on campus or off campus, or if you're trying to get credit for the professional development certificate through the Cisneros Institute of Emerging Leaders, then you'll want to do a reflection. And here are the questions I would encourage you to use to answer that reflection. All right, so I'll read through them just so they make sense, and we will end our time together today. So we talked about this a lot. Preparation is key. So what kind of research might you do before networking with other professionals? I'm kind of rephrasing that, so hopefully that makes sense. We also talked about nonverbal communication and how important and how strongly expected those are. What's your strongest skill, and which one are you working on? What if you make a mistake in dining etiquette? Maybe you drop your fork like I did, right? How do you recover? Let's talk through that. So give me some ideas of what might happen and how you would recover. How would you ensure that you are professional and polite in your conversations? Conversations in the workplace, conversations at a conference, conversations across a meal. What things are you going to do? And what are some steps you would take to follow up with all these people that you've networked with in any of the scenarios that we've talked about? We didn't really talk about that today, but I want you to think about it and figure out what you would personally do. And I want to hear what you have to say about it. Very interested to hear what you're going to reflect on and what you have to say and ideas that you have. And I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to seeing you around on campus. If you have any questions, reach out. All right, thanks so much. I hope you have a wonderful day and good luck.